Well, we're back on the Chama water tank, which is to say, actually, the east end of the locomotive shops.
Right.
And believe it or not, we're finished.
Oh, sort of.
Yeah, at least with the east end, we're going to be doing trees, rocks, and cliffs, and that pretty much finishes this area up, and we'll move down to the west end of the locomotive shops.
Yes, and then we'll take a gander at that end and decide that it needs 1 or 2 more trees.
That's right, and then we'll come back over here, and nothing is ever finished. Not on a model railroad. We're picking up where we left off last week, which was working on the cliff over here.
Oh, that sounds dangerous.
Don't fall off the cliff. But I hit it with the heat gun was the last thing, just to smooth out the surface. And now we're ready to get some finished texture on here and some color and that sort of thing. So I'm going to be using Plaster of Paris over the extruded styrene foam. Back in the day, we did all our scenery out of different kinds of plaster, usually the hard plasters like Hydrocal. But Plaster of Paris is a softer plaster, and I think for doing like final coatings over scenery and stuff, the nice thing is you can easily carve it. You can even, carve it with a wire brush and stuff. And so that's why I want to use Plaster of Paris. And I'm going to mix up a really thin and gooey batch of this, and then I can just use a paintbrush and paint it directly over the styrene foam. There's a sort of an exact proportion of water to plaster to get the exact right results out of it. But if it is possible to make it in a thinner and gooier batch, you have to be a little careful doing this because you can create something that'll never dry. But it is possible to cheat the mixture between the two into something that's a lot runnier like this, and then just paint it directly onto the surface that you want, and it will dry, and it will dry to as hard a surface as Plaster of Paris will provide, which, like I say, is a fairly soft surface. But my goal here is to work it down into the seams between the different pieces of extruded foam to kind of hide those gaps, and also it creates a more porous stone-like surface. If you put the paint directly on top of the extruded foam, even after you've hit it with the heat gun, it has a smooth plasticky kind of quality where once you've got a plaster surface on it like this, it takes paint and behaves much more like stone, I guess you'd say. In places you can see brush strokes, but again, because this is such a soft plaster, you can hit these areas with a fine wire brush and knock that right down and get rid of the brush strokes. I've missed a few places here and there, but I'm not terribly concerned because those will all be covered up with paint. If the pink foam were coming through the paint, that would be an issue. But as long as I've got my seams all filled in and a surface that'll take paint, then I'm good to go. Now, as always with my rock painting technique, it involves putting on several different layers of paint. The first coat is just to get a good basic color on here, somewhere right around, halfway between the dark and the lights, if you will. Just a nice medium color to function as the base coat. And this time I definitely do want to cover up all of that pink foam. I don't want to see any of that poking through my paint here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a medium gray over everything and try to get that right up to the edges, and like I say, make sure that there's no pink still showing through anywhere. As always, when you start putting paint on a model, you get a uniform color on there, and it may show up some flaws or imperfections that you have that you weren't aware of until you got a uniform coating of paint on here, and then you're going, oh gee, this area needs to be sanded or something. So sometimes it's that feeling of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, where you go, well, this area now needs to be attacked with a wire brush or sanded or something. But that's just the process. Our goal here is to get a nice uniform color on here without seeing any any unwanted seams or any brush marks in the plaster or strange imperfections. Just a nice uniform color on here, more or less uniform color. As you can see, I'm blending a couple of different colors of gray on the base coat. But just to get a nice, more or less uniform base coat on here. And make sure that if we're revealing any imperfections, that we deal with those at this point. And now I'm going to put a nice dark wash on here. Not quite black, but a really dark gray. As you can see, just runny, gooey, sloppy, wet and runny. I want it to get down in the cracks and run down the surfaces here, creating in some places little rivulets. If I see something going on that I don't like, then I'll hit that with the brush and smooth it out. But some of these drips and these runny areas are kind of fun to leave behind, so you can see you can still see these runs in the surface once it's dry. And now on to dry brushing. Again, this is my process. I go back and forth between dark washes and lighter dry brushing. So you get a lighter color on your brush, and then you kind of dry that off a little bit on a paper towel so that you're not moving a whole lot of paint over here. You just want to have some color in your brush so that when you bring that over onto the cliff face, it transfers a little bit of paint onto the high areas, but doesn't screw up your runny areas down in the cracks. Just want to bring out the highlights. The washes bring out the shadows. The dry brushing brings out the highlights. And then sometimes I'll repeat this process. It just sort of depends. This is looking pretty good, but I might want to put another wash and a little more dry brushing and just kind of go back and forth between the two for a while. Okay, let's move on to the dirt, the earth around the water tank and under the water tank and so on. This is going to be built up out of Sculptamold. So one of the first things I've got to do is figure out the exact location for the water tank. I've just had it sort of sitting here, and it can sit in any number of different places, but it's got to line up with the tracks so that when you bring the water spout down, it lines up with the filler on the locomotives. So I can slide the water tank up and down along the length of the track, but its exact location in terms of distance from the track has got to be set by the spout on the water tank. There's a path between the water tank and the coaling tower that goes back to the outhouse, and so I want this path to be kind of fun, and I need to have enough space here for that without crowding the water tank up against the backdrop. It's going to be really close to the backdrop, but I don't want it too close to the backdrop because I want to be able to have something going on in that space. So I want to have a nice little serpentine path here that also climbs up the hill to the outhouse because it's a little bit higher than everything else. So this should be really a fun little area once it's done. So I've marked out here the exact locations for the base of the water tank and the outhouse. I want to place the outhouse in such a way that you can see the entire outhouse. It was built by Steve Stribble, and it's such an amazing little structure, and it would be a shame to tuck it all the way to the back here and not be able to see the sides and a little bit of the back. So I'm placing it in such a way that you can see it back through the legs of the water tank and so on, but you're able to see the entire outhouse. Some of the commenters have noticed that there's someone in the outhouse.
Yes, he needs to close the door, but probably needs some ventilation.
We could actually keep the door closed and then just say, "Oh, we opened the door."
Yeah.
I think it's kind of funnier to have the door open.
Yeah, just a bit. It's a conversation piece.
But you and I worked together on this figure.
Yes, we did.
And I kind of cobbled him together out of body parts that they're Chrysler body parts, and then I handed the whole thing off to you for paint and clothing.
Yeah, clothing or partial clothing or however that works.
And the magazine.
Yes, the magazine. You got to have reading material.
Well, you never know how long you're going to be there.
Yeah, that's what they say. No job's complete until the paperwork's done.
So I'm ready to start cutting out some pink foam, some extruded styrene foam, and start building up this hill that the outhouse sits on and the little path leading up to it. And then also the foam comes right up against the base for the water tank. So all of this is being cut out with my hot wire bow cutter here. And then I'm gluing the whole thing together with Loctite's PL300 foam board adhesive. I'm building it up out of 1-inch extruded foam, and one of the tricky parts here is getting it up against the curved backdrop. So figuring out that curvature and then the cutout for the outhouse. And then this hill comes right up against the base for the water tank, and so then that has to match the base of the water tank. And then the hill up to the outhouse, I actually want to have like stair steps up here built out of 2 railroad ties, so that will be a fun little space. So anyway, cobbling this together out of small pieces and making sure that it all sort of fits together. And I want to make sure that both the outhouse and the water tank are somewhat easily removable in case I need to get back in here for servicing or cleaning or something. So I think I'm ready to move on to final shaping of the area. As with the cliff face, I'm using my Sureform tool to now put a final contour on the hill. As I mentioned before, this is really messy. All these little bits and pieces of the extruded foam have a static charge to them, and they want to stick to everything and go all over the place. So have a vacuum standing by, a shop type vacuum, so you can clean this up as you go, or it'll just end up everywhere. Now, one of the tricky things here is I have to keep in mind that I want to form these 2 railroad ties into this hill to form stair steps up to the outhouse. And while the outhouse is going to be sort of stuck down in here with scenery materials, I do want to be able to grab a hold of it and just pull it up and out of here if I need to get into this area for maintenance or cleaning or anything. Now, Karen painted this really neat little hobo camp on the backdrop, and I thought it would be really fun to have a campfire, a flickering campfire. And I thought if I work it just right, I can have these 3 flickering LEDs create a flickering effect up onto the backdrop that'll look like a campfire. They're just the regular flickering LEDs you can get off of Amazon, but as you can see, I've painted them using these, they call it like stained glass paint, but it's for painting onto those little plastic stained glass windows and give them a color. So I'm soldering together a whole little unit here. I've got dropping resistors in here and the whole thing sealed together with heat shrink. And now I've got to place it here in the foam, and I've got to run the wires along the surface because I can't get to the underside of the layout right here. So the wires have to be exposed along the surface for about 18 inches. And then at that point I can drill a hole down and access the underside of the layout. I've secured the whole thing in place with gaff tape, and then it'll all be covered over with Sculptamold, which will cover it up and secure it in place. And it actually turned out better than I ever thought it would. The 3 flickering LEDs are right up against the backdrop, and so they're casting their light up onto the hobo camp, and I've put some fire logs in the foreground here, and gee, I'll be darned. that actually turned out pretty cool.
There's nothing like being around an open fire, even if you're a hobo, drinking some coffee and enjoying the evening.
There was a time when a hobo camp had a certain kind of romantic notion to it.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, next up, Sculptamold. This stuff is sort of like the Plaster of Paris, but it has paper mixed into it. Lots of people use Sculptamold on their scenery. But I dumped a bit of Sculptamold into this bowl here, And then the key is to add just the right amount of water. You want a gooey and sticky consistency and not too runny or watery. Notice that I've also added in a little acrylic color paint so that it's not just stark white. I'll still come back and add color over the top of the whole thing and paint that in, but it gives a nice base coat. Otherwise, what you're putting down is stark white. I have to be careful not to cover up the flickering LEDs for the campfire, but I can come right up to them, and then I'm going to place fire logs in that area so that the light is coming from the fire logs. This is also when I can build in my railroad tie stair steps up to the outhouse. Just kind of mush those down into the Sculptamold and shape everything around there with my fingers. I'm also forming a lot of terrain underneath the water tank here. It'll be kind of gooey and muddy as well, but I don't want to just leave the bare plastic. That would not look good at all. And I want to bring that right up to the abutment retaining walls here, so that I've got a nice continuous dirt all the way from one side of the area to the other. I have to end the Sculptamold as it gets close to the tunnel portal, because again, the tunnel portal is removable, so if I build that area up, I won't be able to remove the tunnel portal. It's important when you're putting this down, it wants to go down kind of looking like this with little oddball pieces sticking up and so on. You really need to go in with your fingers and smooth it out the best you can so there's no weird irregularities. I'm getting it right up to the base for the outhouse, hopefully without actually sealing the outhouse in place. I do want to be able to lift the outhouse out. There's this fun little ditch, if you will, next to the hobo encampment. I want to have some standing water down in here and that kind of thing. I found it impossible to not get Sculptamold all over the tops of my railroad ties, so once it's set up, I just came in here with my Sureform tool and kind of smoothed everything out and took the very tops off of the railroad ties so that they look worn and like people have been walking up through here. And now to get some color on here, because I mixed a little acrylic paint in with my Sculptamold, it's not, it's not stark white, so this process is going easier. But I'm using some fairly dilute acrylic paint here in different colors of brown, and just kind of manipulating that into the area so that I get a variegated surface. A little of this brown, a little of that brown, and try to keep it homogeneous and yet with variegation in it, so it's not all exactly the same color. I'm using a fairly dark color here. The reason for that will become obvious here in a minute, because I'm going to put actual dirt over the top of this, a lighter colored dirt. And so where this is coming up through the dirt, I want to make sure that it's a darker color than the light colored dirt over the top of the whole thing. It's a really cool effect. You'll see that here in just a second. And as I say, there's a fair amount of variegation in this coat of paint, a fair amount of lights and darks all blended in together here. And as always, you're not sure just what you've got until the color dries. These acrylics, craft acrylics, but all the acrylics have a habit of really changing color as they dry. And now to add some squirrel dirt. We've got several different colors of dirt in jars here. The squirrel dirt comes from Echo Canyon, and we named it squirrel dirt because there's ground squirrels there. Squirrel dirt is a fairly light colored dirt, and it looks really good going over the Sculptamold here. And you can see why I chose to use a darker Sculptamold, because of the lighter colored dirt. The light colored dirt really sets itself down into the Sculptamold, and once that's sprinkled on there, then I rub it into the surface. I really want to set it down in there, and it really lightens up the Sculptamold. And so you can see that the Sculptamold is poking through in a lot of different places, and how nice that looks if it's just a slightly darker color than the soil I'm putting over the top of it, because it really picks up a lot of the color of the overlying dirt. Where the Sculptamold is coming through here, it really looks like heavily compacted dirt, like where people have been walking through here, and the dirt's gotten very compacted with loose dirt down in and around that. I'm trying to work the dirt in everywhere so that it's got a nice uniform look. Look how nice that looks around the hill with the hobo camp. Up close to the coaling tower, I'm going to be adding more cinders in here, so I'm not terribly concerned about that. But the next thing here will be spilled coal and cinders around the coaling tower. And then there's the little path up to the door on the frost box and just the whole area underneath the water tank here. I'm going to be adding, like I say, a little bit of mud and moisture in the final version here, and maybe some vegetation. But it makes for a pretty decent look. I think anybody would be happy to walk the path here up to the outhouse. People always ask, what's the figure? This is Engineer Bill from Ozark Miniatures. It's a really great figure. And I had always planned to have at least one tree. I would have had more, but there's just no room. Anyway, we got these tree branches from Greg Uzar in Northern California. He was one of our earliest subscribers, and he sent us some branches off the bushes in his backyard to use as trees on our railroad. Now, normally I fix this stuff in place by spritzing the whole area with alcohol and then adding dilute white glue into that. But if you do that with this dirt, it ruins the dirt. It all turns to a really dark color. So I'm actually securing it in place here with Aquanet hairspray, and dries nice and doesn't really spoil the look. Doesn't change the look much as it dries. I love the look of the tree sticking up from behind the water tank, and the bark color matches the bark on the backdrop trees. So I'll be adding in some vegetation that sort of matches the same color. And now I want to add some vegetation onto the tree and also a little bit around the base of the backdrop here. I'm using Woodland Scenic's foliage in the light green, and I'm using that both down here by the hobo camp and up on the tree. It's a very light green that mostly matches the color on the backdrop. And then I like to secure it in place with the thin CA, because as the thin CA sets up, the foliage changes color and you get these vapors coming off of here. And don't get those vapors anywhere near your eyes, because oh my gosh. But it'll stick the foliage in place, and it creates this variegation in the color, which I like. I really like that effect. So I've always used just some thin CA for securing this in place. Now the foliage that's down around the hobo camp, on the backdrop, that's painted in as sagebrush, and so I want to add a sage color. I want to try to match the color of the sagebrush I painted on the backdrop. And so I'm using the exact same paint as Italian sage and crocodile. And now decomposed granite. You can buy this online on Amazon and so on. I used to just, when I was living at Lake Tahoe, you could just run down to the highway and grab some, and I've been using this stuff in modeling forever. Bonsai people use it, and so you can actually buy bags of it. But it's just what it says. It's decomposed granite. You want to find some that has a lot of this fine powdery stuff in it as well, fines as they call it. But the goal is to dump it on the granite cliffs here and then just sort of let it cascade down into the areas where it would just naturally cascade down, and then fix it in place with a bit of dilute white glue. I'm putting it around at the base of the retaining walls first here, just because I was really looking forward to seeing what it would look like there. And yeah, I like the look of it. And if it gets up onto the retaining walls a bit, then that's a plus too. But you can see I just want it to sort of fall and land in the areas where the decomposing granite would just naturally fall and land as the cliffs erode. Here again, I have to be careful not to get it right up against the tunnel portal because that's removable, and if I glue this stuff in place right there, it won't be removable anymore. Of course, I was hoping that the colors would match, and they more or less do. I mean, it's close enough, I think. Now you can see why it's important to have the fines, the really fine material in there in order to achieve a really nice realistic look. If it were just the loose granular stuff, that wouldn't look that good at all. But with the fine material in there, it looks pretty good. This is what it looks like once it's secured in place with a bit of dilute white glue. It changes the color a little bit, but it doesn't change it in any kind of bad way. In fact, I actually sort of like it more. It sometimes requires just a bit of encouragement to get it to land in the areas that you want. So in this case, I put a little bit of white glue here first and then cascaded the material down into it to make sure that it landed there on the little ledge and stayed put. In the upper part of the cliff here, I put these ledges in here hoping that the stuff would sort of stick on the ledges and hang in there, and it has, as well as the sort of sloped hillside. I was hoping I could get a little tiny bit of material to just stay there, and yeah, that's working great. Okay, on to tree roots. If you follow the channel, you know that I like to make tree roots out of weed roots. So out into the yard to pull up some weeds. This was a little clump of grass when I pulled it up. It had just the right bunch of roots underneath there, so I thought this is exactly what I need. I can use this. So I've taken about a third of this little clump and I've stuck it up against the base of this one tree which is precariously hanging out here on the cliff face. Sort of wrapped it around there so I get roots exposed all the way around the tree, and then dumped a little bit of the decomposed granite in there so that there's rocks and dust and everything trapped down in the tree roots. And then it involves ever so slightly trimming back the roots so that they're not sticking out all over the place. The other tree up here has a little better anchorage on the cliff, so I haven't got quite as many exposed roots over here. Same exact technique. And then there's the really small baby tree down here, and I wanted to include just a few roots down there too. I think that looks kind of nice. Again, if you follow the channel, you will know that the trees up here were built by our good friend Al Badham, who passed away a few years ago. He built over, a couple hundred of these trees. They all ended up on Steve Stribble's railroad, and then when he dismantled that, he gave them all to us. So we have a whole bunch of these trees. As I mentioned before, there's going to be spilled coal, cinders, and sand around the Sandhouse and the coaling tower here. The coal actually came from the coaling tower at Chama. The sand was given to us by Steve Stribble. He got this from Cathedral Gorge in Nevada. It's a really fine, wonderful sand. Works great for this. And then the cinders, of course, as we've mentioned in the past, we gathered up over 100 pounds of cinders at the Roundhouse in Evanston, Wyoming. We use that for cinders everywhere on the railroad that we need cinders. There's always several thousand pounds of spilled sand around the Sandhouse, so we want to duplicate that where they've been dumping sand into the locomotives here, that the sand has just gone absolutely everywhere. And then this is all secured in place using our usual technique of spritzing the entire area down with a fine mist of isopropyl alcohol. And then once everything is good and saturated with that, coming back with a pipette with highly dilute white glue, about 2 to 1, 2 parts water to 1 part white glue, and that will just soak into the alcohol-soaked sand and cinders and stuff, and just dry and really secure that in place. Because it's alcohol, it actually dries pretty fast. I've done this in the past using water with a bit of soap in it, and it'll take days and days and days to dry, so that the alcohol's better. And in the areas with the really chunky material like the spilled coal, the dilute white glue doesn't hold on to it very well, so I'll come back and add a little tiny bit of just straight up white glue and make sure that it soaks down in there, doesn't sit on the surface. But you have to have a much stickier glue when you're working with really granular material like this. There's a few areas where I want a really wet and muddy look, and the white glue will reveal where those areas are. The nice thing here, if you put a couple of coats on, it'll usually darken that area and make it look like it's sort of wet, and then you can actually come back with a clear material. Woodland Scenics makes a material for doing just this, so that you have something that looks like standing water right on the surface of the whole thing.
Yeah, I've never been around one of these tanks that didn't leak a little bit, and yeah, there's water all over.
Yeah, and swampy goo.
Oh, yeah.
So this is going to be fun.
It will be. We'll see what we come up with.
And see, there it proves it. Nothing's ever done.
That's right. I'm sure we'll find more.
Well, I'm not sure where we're going to go from here.
Oh, I'm sure we're going places with it because, yeah, it's coming right along, but there's room for more things.
And down at the west end of the Locomotive shop, there's going to be the hand car set out.
Oh, boy.
And the elephant in the room, the turntable.
That is an elephant.
Oh, boy. I've been so intimidated by the whole idea of building the turntable. But that's probably actually the next thing up.
Right.
Might as well jump in and get her done.
Get her done, yep.
And so if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe to the channel, because I'm sure whatever we're up to, you're going to want to follow along.
Oh, you never know with us.
So the easy peasy way to subscribe is by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you on Tuesday.
Right.
See ya.
We'll see ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.